Now to my special report tonight. Bob Mueller will eventually finish his investigation, potentially as soon as next month. And Mueller's boss, Rod Rosenstein, signaling he'll leave the DOJ soon once Mueller is done. But the final decisions about Mueller's work will soon be in someone else's hands. Not Mueller, not Rosenstein. So even as President Trump rages about his wall and these battles over the shutdown, keep your eye on what else Trump is doing that he's not tweeting about tonight. He's trying to put the future of the Mueller probe in the hands of William Barr. And next week, even as this shutdown may certainly grind on, these Mueller questions will come to a head at a Senate confirmation hearing for Barr. When a new attorney general is appointed during a criminal probe involving the president, it tests our system. The founders knew that. Our Constitution is built to hold politicians accountable, not let them cancel out the rule of law or separation of powers just because the heat is on. And that is why next week's confirmation hearings are crucial. It's no accident that a co-equal congressional branch has the final say on this crucial appointment. The Senate not only decides whether to approve the Attorney General, it can require that this Attorney General under oath will back up Bob Mueller. And we know that because it's happened before. This is very important. President Nixon appointed former Pentagon Chief Elliot Richardson to be his Attorney General in 1973. And according to James Doyle, an insider who worked on the Watergate prosecutor's staff, Nixon cast Richardson as a symbol of integrity to save the administration in a time of crisis. Richardson was nominated to run the DOJ at a crucial time for Watergate. The question was whether the DOJ would really be allowed to probe into that White House. Now, today, Barr's nomination comes at a crucial time for the Russia probe. The question is whether the DOJ will really allow Mueller to follow the facts he finds. Now, back in '73, the Senate didn't simply vet Richardson. It used those hearings as a high-stakes opportunity to extract a binding arrangement under oath to protect the special prosecutor's Watergate probe, demanding that the Watergate prosecutor would get final authority, which Richardson initially objected to, saying he needed the ultimate responsibility for matters in the DOJ. Now, the Senate stopped him right then, and they said they wouldn't even hold a hearing until he committed to more independence.
Members of the Judiciary Committee greeted Richardson with smiles and handshakes, but the friendly greeting was deceptive.
We have to create the appearance of objectivity and fairness in this investigation, whether he had an independent prosecutor or not. But who would buy it?
No more hearings will be held until Richardson names a special prosecutor acceptable to the committee with guidelines guaranteeing his independence.
That was key, pushing Richardson to commit to, one, appointing that special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, and two, respecting his independence.
Mr. Cox will have full independence as far as I'm concerned. He has been given, or will be given, upon his appointment, full authority to investigate all aspects of the Watergate case.
What if, in Senator Byrd's words, this trail leads into the Oval Office at the White House?
Well, as I replied then, the trail should be followed wherever it leads.
Now, the senators didn't know that trail would lead to a White House with a secret taping system, but they knew enough about the Constitution to use the Senate as a check against Nixon's attempt to kneecap the DOJ. Democrat Robert Byrd said Richardson was confirmed on the assurance he would not intervene in the probe on Nixon's behalf.
The forthright answers by Mr. Cox and by Mr. Richardson to the sharp questions from committee members assure us, as well as we can be assured under these circumstances, that the prosecutor will have full and complete authority and that Mr. Richardson will not attempt in any way to intervene.
Those assurances to the Senate mattered, helping to later protect how the DOJ ran that Watergate probe. In the same book I mentioned, Doyle recounts how behind the scenes, when Richardson dealt with Watergate, he cited his commitment that had been made to the Senate. Now, that's the precedent that hangs over next week's hearing on Bill Barr, because later, when Nixon defied the special prosecutor's requests, famously for the Watergate tapes, and demanded Richardson fire the prosecutor, well, Richardson actually had two reasons to stand up to Nixon. One, he thought that order was wrong. But that's always a debatable thing between a president and an attorney general. More importantly, 2, Richardson already pledged to the Senate that kind of order was wrong. And that was not debatable. It was black and white and under oath. So, as you know, as everyone now knows, he famously quit in protest, setting off the constitutional crisis of Nixon's Saturday Night Massacre.
My own single most important commitment to this objective was my commitment to the independence of the special prosecutor. I could not be faithful to this commitment and also acquiesce in the curtailment of his authority.
The country tonight is in the midst of what may be the most serious constitutional crisis in its history.
Many remember that. Now, some people look at the record and nowadays say, well, things don't work like that anymore. But if you think that, you may not be paying attention, because the Senate can make them work like that. In fact, it was in the very early days of the Russia probe that U.S. senators did press Jeff Sessions on the probe's independence, and he did make a pledge, similarly to the Senate, and upheld it. In fact, it was the single act that led, we now know, to Rod Rosenstein being in a position to appoint Bob Mueller in the first place, and which forever burned the Sessions-Trump relationship.
We are dealing with an investigation that involves the Trump campaign. Would you recuse yourself as Attorney General?
I would review it and try to do the right thing. I have recused myself in the matters that deal with the Trump campaign. I should not be involved investigating a campaign I had a role in.
Next week, the Senate decides how it will press Jeff Sessions' replacement. Now, some Trump allies say that because Barr is a respected, experienced prosecutor, and he is, there isn't a whole lot more they need to do. Some Nixon allies in the Senate made the same argument about Richardson's appointment. You can see these echoes already.
Sir, Elliot Richardson has proven worthy of his trust in many posts, and he ought to be trusted.
He has a high opinion of Mr. Mueller and has no reason for Mr. Mueller to stop doing his job.
But history teaches the opposite. And this is so important for next week's hearings. The Constitution is not based on trust or opinion. Attorney General Richardson was pressed into a pact that people hoped would be unnecessary, but it was necessary. And now, when it comes to the DOJ, let's be clear, Donald Trump is no Richard Nixon. He's way worse, more openly hostile to the rule of law, more disrespectful of the FBI agents who risk their lives. Nobody knows where Mueller is headed exactly, but next week's hearing could decide where he's allowed to go and if he's allowed to hold Mueller back or keep the report secret. And history shows today's senators should do a whole lot more than ask hard questions next week. To uphold the law, they have to get the same kind of public commitment that the Senate got in the Nixon era. Trust may be enough when the times are normal, but not in times of stress. Mr. Richardson knew that, as did another student of the law, Mr. Sean Carter, who once said, "Trust is a word you seldom hear from us. A drought will define a man when the well dries up." Well, folks, the drought may come soon. Droughts bring stress, and when Mr. Richardson faced one, he pledged to combat the stress by reaffirming his pledge to uphold the law, even as he stood next to the man he would later hold accountable.
This is a time, of course, when the institutions of our government are under stress. If there are flaws, they are in ourselves. And our task must be one, therefore, not of redesign, but of renewal, of reaffirmation.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.